All right, hey squad, welcome back to another episode of the Pixelists Podcast. Flying solo today. My illustrious co-host Will is not feeling well today, and so he wasn't able to jump on the podcast and talk about our show today. If you're just tuning in, today we're going to be talking about the latest episode of The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, episode 31, called The Souvenir. We have a new episode dropping tomorrow. If you've never checked out the podcast before, by the way, this is the place where we talk about all things nerd. So we love talking about anything from Critical Role to like I mentioned, Wizards, Witch, and the Wild One, D&D, various video games, and what have you. And we'd like to break it down and just have a little chat, a little discussion about the latest episode of, again, whether it's CR or WBN or what have you. But anywho, if you're a first-time viewer of the channel, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We do have a Discord that you're going to want to check out. The Discord is going to be linked in the episode description. And from there, we have all sorts of chatter about the content that I already mentioned. I'd say come say hello, meet us. And I like to describe it as a cozy little Discord channel with people who actually like the content. They like the content shows that they actually I was thinking like we like the stocks, but we like the content we watch. And so you can check that out and get into the discussion with us. We just wrapped up our live watch party with Downfall for Critical Role. And then this past Sunday, we've begun wrapping up our Calamity rewatch. If you've never seen Critical Role's Calamity, we actually have the 4th episode lined up for this Sunday that you can check out. So, anywho, I've never done this solo before. I know Will's done it solo without me a couple of times. So this will be a little bit of a shorter episode today as we chat through some things that happen. Let me also pull up the Discord channel for Worlds Beyond Number, because there was some chatter that was happening in there. So let me get that in front of myself here. Here we go. But if you're new to checking out our channel, we'd like to do a little recap before we dive into the conversation of the episode. And we'll hit just sort of the high notes from the episode, and then we'll go into the actual discussion. And we'll go from there. So this was episode 31 of The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, The Souvenir. And this episode opened up with Ame, Suvi, and the Fox arriving at Hakea's grove, for lack of a better phrase, and being shocked to discover Badze, the one of the spirits who had swallowed up Ursulon, basically, who's sort of like writhing on the ground, and then Sakuro, the sort of like tree-like spirit who's just like hacking away at this wolf body that's mutilated and seemingly continuously regenerating in this hot spring. And meanwhile, in the distance, Hakea is asleep. The two spirits immediately see Suvi and Ame, and they're like, we got to take care of these people. The fox lets Ame know that Ursulon is inside of Badze. Again, just keeping to the high notes. Sakuro's beating on the wolf. Ame is going to cast a curse on Badze, and it is so effective it actually knocks the spell out from her, for a lack of a better phrase, and Ursulon is released. Brennan describes Ursulon in the Grove of the Well, this other place where he meets the stranger from last episode, sort of like dissipating and cracking, and he returns back to the world of Umora. He gets his sword, immediately begins to attack Sakuro to try to help Heinrol, who's the wolf that's regenerating. And meanwhile, the fox is sent to try to wake up Hakea. And Badze, by the way, is like sending vines and like trying to keep him from making it there. Brennan naturally does a great job acting out the fox, who's sort of like bouncing around and just trying to make it to Hakea. And then finally gets to Hakea and screams, "Wake up!" Hakea wakes up. Meanwhile, Ursulon kills Sakuro, or rather knocks him out, I guess. And we get this amazing scene where Hikea actually, with the spirits slain and defeated, Hikea goes over to the spring, and Brennan describes, I don't know if it wasn't a banishment spell, and maybe it was gate, I think, where she essentially like opens up this portal, like this void, like deep within the earth. And then she pulls out from Sakuro this like seed, almost like this heart of Sakuro, and drops it into this like endless well at the center of the earth, seemingly imprisoning him for eternity. Hyrule regenerates, and his head like crawls back up onto his body and has a very warm moment with Ursulon. It's basically just like, you saved us. You saved me. Thank you. And then meanwhile, they basically tell Hikea like what they know. They're like, hey, your two spirits are working with the man in black. Hikea's response to this is, okay, the spirits have lost their faith in us, sort of implying that like the man in black has now taken things into his own hands. They know that the meeting to decide Ame's fate is only within a handful of hours. So they say goodbye to Hikea, as Hikea is basically like, I need to confer with Grimoire about this. They leave her grove. They go back to the room, basically the not the hovel, the place where where Grandmother Wren had stayed in previous visits to the castle. And it's here that Suvi begins to share this wand of covenant that belonged to Hikea that's in another spire, seemingly. She tries to perform what she remembers, the tree saying to Hikea in this vision. Brennan mentions that Ursulon, being a wild one, would know that this is Yeola, excuse me, which is basically like the world tree, or like this deep tree of knowledge. And while Suvi can't remember exactly, can't perform exactly what Yeola has said, she knows that essentially, as we know, Hikea has basically said, hey, I've come, I'm at the end of my quest. There's darkness all around. The witches are scattered. Mentions there is a sorcerer across the sea rising up, and basically is asking Yeola for a gift, some kind of thing to bind the witches together. And we're presumably seeing the first moments of when this coven was formed, or really like the boundaries of it was formed. Well, they know, or rather Suvi knows, that if she could go get her music box, she could possibly watch it again and maybe share what Yeola has actually said. So she has the idea. She actually feels a little bit nervous about keeping such a special item so close, like within the castle. She goes back to her quarters. I think it's now she casts Identify on it. And Brennan gives this basically vision of like the archmages of the Citadel and artificers and like all these people being involved in the creation of this item, and that this music box isn't like a random casual item. It's actually what Brennan calls the peak of magic and technology of the Citadel. It's an incredibly important item, and it's basically like the history of this item is essentially the history of discovering how to steal something, how to make copies of something without actually stealing it. So all that to say, Suvi immediately feels like this is too precious to keep in the Citadel or in the castle. So she decides to go out to her retinue, to her fellow mages that are on the airship, and try to be in a little bit more of a safe place. She makes it to the Great Hall on her way out to like the final door, when the fire in the Great Hall goes out, and she hears a voice. She hears a voice of Marara basically saying, "Are you leaving?" She turns to see Marara only inches from her face, and finds out that if she is to leave the Citadel in this moment, if she's to leave the castle in this moment, she will not be allowed re-entry. And she knows how important it is for her to be present at, or at least around, for Ame's meeting. So knowing the risk of maybe losing her chance to get back in, she basically says that, okay, well, that's fine. I was just going to check on my people. I'll just go back to Ursulon and Ame. And she leaves talking about how absolutely, terrifying this witch is. It's a very cool atmospheric scene between the two of them. So she goes back to Ursulon and Ame. She pulls out the music box. It's basically like, hey, I can't explain why I have this, but watch this. They watch the recording of Hakea meeting the tree, Uola, and the tree basically says, I will give to you this wand. I'll give you this wand of covenant as a symbol of binding from between you and your other sisters. Go and choose your sisters to be part of this coven. And Hakea basically says, well, how will I know? Like, how do I know who to pick? And Uola basically says, the only rule that really matters is to ensure that this covenant continues to exist. You must pick basically an odd number of witches to be part of it. 5, 7, 9, 13, and so on. Interestingly, he skips over the number 11. I have no idea why. But this is, again, presumably the starting steps of when the covenant was formed. And that is where our episode comes to an end, as they sort of finish watching this vision about how the original Coven of Elders was formed. So that was episode 31, The Souvenir of the Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One from Worlds Beyond Number. And again, join our Discord and chat with us a little bit about the show. We always need more people who can talk about it. So I don't have my amazing co-host here, but I'll just talk about a few things that stood out to me. Marara, absolutely terrifying. Like Suvi said, it always blows my mind how Brennan has such a knack for creating so much presence on screen. It's an audio podcast, right? But how much presence he creates with his characters. And think about this for a second. Think about how little Marara actually said in this episode, and how underserved's not the right word. But think of all she really said was, "Are you leaving? Oh, well, you should know you wouldn't be able to re-enter." It wasn't like anything directly threatening, but it just, and also what's kind of interesting too is Brennan is so good at creating presence without really going heavy into accents. Like when I was a new DM, I thought that every character, every NPC needed their own full-on individual accent, and I can do like 2 accents maybe. So I was like, this guy's British again, I guess, and I'm not even that good at any of that stuff. But it's been encouraging watching Brennan and realizing how intentional he is about creating that presence without relying on something that's immediately apparent to the listener, an accent or like a gregarious, like maybe even like a very over the top personality. So I love that scene with Suvi. I love this idea that she can't leave. Like we're sort of locked in here together until all of this gets resolved. It reminded me of like those old scary movies where like some of the side characters like leave. They're like, hey, we're going to go get help, or like, we'll be back. And then after they leave, you realize that like you're truly alone. So I really enjoyed that. And then just a crazy combat at the start of this episode. I did not expect them to defeat Badse and Sakuro. Once they woke up Hakea, I saw that as like the way out. And what an interesting spell she casted on Sakuro's seed to seemingly seal him away forever. Brennan also had some really interesting comments about Hekea. We see this woman in this vision where she is so earnest and so eager, and mentions the sorcerer rising up across the sea, which I think that had to be intentional from Brennan. Not that it's necessarily going to come up as like the BBEG, but I thought that was such an incredible or an intentional lore detail for this world that he's building. But something else that Brennan mentioned was this idea of Hekea having lived so many lifetimes past the point of where she probably should have passed on the station before, and yet she didn't. And she doesn't seem to have an apprentice either. So the person who originally passionately envisioned and created this coven now is seemingly the most, I shouldn't say the most compared to the other witches, but is disinterested? Is that the right word? We don't see that same eagerness, I think, that we see in this past vision with the World Tree. We see a younger version of her where she is so deeply concerned by the terrors of her world and what it could mean for the future of Amora. And here we have a similar characterization of Ame with that same eagerness and that same determination. All that to say, if Hekea was to die, what would happen to her station? You know, it's where I've kind of thought leading up to this moment has been, you know, maybe they'd make the argument for Hekea to be destroyed as well, and Grimoire wouldn't want that. But now knowing how much history Hekea has, you know, it's and how much esteem she has for her position, I almost wonder that comment, the spirits have lost their faith in us. I don't know who the leader is of the coven, if there even is one, but we know we're in Indri's citadel. We know we're in, you know, she's the one who hosts it. And I want to find a comment. This came up, I paired this with a comment from Carrot Plush in our Discord, who basically was throwing around an idea of what if the replaced witch isn't actually going to be Hekea? What if the argument's going to be for Indri? And I think about that line from Hekea, the spirits have lost their faith in us. If Indri is sort of like the unspoken leader of the coven, and one of their biggest stakeholders are the spirits who seem to be abandoning the direction of the witches or the partnership of the witches. Could this be a motive for Hekea to say, hey, we need some new leadership? Indri, I think if we're getting rid of Ame, we should get rid of you too. And could that be the most compelling reason for this vote to not go through, with Indri, you know, who has so much seemingly like import and ego, for it to be like, well, we're not going to do that, obviously. So that's what's top of mind for me. That's what I'm wondering, if that's what's going to happen. And possibly next episode might be the actual finale. So we'll have to see. We know the vote is happening. The conversation is happening in tomorrow's episode. But all that to say, I'd love to know what you guys thought of the episode and what was top of mind for you. We seem to keep getting more and more juicy lore, which I love. But join the Discord, throw in some chatter in our Worlds Beyond Number channel, and we'll see what next episode brings. So that's all I got today. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and later we'll have our Downfall episode 3 breakdown later in the week. And then we have our Friday afternoon stream. And then we'll have, even beyond that, we'll have our Calamity episode 4 watch party on Sunday as well. So thank you all. See ya.